my water just broke. I felt like things really intensified.
She was right there and she was coming.
It was an amazing feeling.
I'm going to cry just thinking about it. I could feel her head.
We heard her cry. We were squeezing hands and she was screaming.
I'm Bryn Hunt Palmer, and you're listening to The Birth Hour. This podcast is designed as a safe place to come together and share childbirth stories. Stick around and join us to hear informative and empowering birth journeys from all over the world. Today's episode is sponsored by Zenith Health. Navigating pregnancy can be overwhelming, especially when it feels like everyone has an opinion, not to mention the late night Googling and social media rabbit holes we've all found ourselves in. Zenith Health helps you navigate pregnancy with access to real evidence, bringing you peace of mind through data. Imagine if your Google searches only returned answers based on real evidence from research studies, clinical guidelines, and physician-authored content. Instead of giving you more opinions, Zenith's Pregnancy Evidence Navigator, or Penny tool, provides exactly that, and it's completely free to use. Next time you have a burning question like a new symptom, a supplement you're unsure about, or a question as you're planning for birth, spare yourself the panic Google and ask Penny your question for a real-time, unbiased review of the evidence at www.zenithhealth.io. At the same time, what really excites me about Zenith is that they've also started the Pregnancy Evidence Project, which is the first large-scale research project wholly focused on learning from the millions of pregnancy and postpartum experiences already happening in the real world. If you choose to opt into this, your pregnancy journey becomes part of the evidence that helps future moms make informed decisions and drives research forward. I'll be discussing both Penny and the Pregnancy Evidence Project in depth with the founder of Zenith, Abigail, at the end of this episode, so stay tuned for that conversation. Depending on where you listen to the podcast, you may have noticed the episode number today, 1,000 episodes of The Birth Hour, and we're also coming up on 10 years of The Birth Hour. And I just really can't believe it, honestly, but at the same time, it feels like it's gone by so fast, and I'm so thankful for all of your support as listeners. And of course, to my Patreon members, I'm always so grateful for your support. You really help keep this podcast going, and you guys are the ones that have access to those other 900 episodes because only the most recent ones are in the main podcast feed. So if anyone wants to join that community on this special day, the link for that is patreon.com/birthhour. It's pretty easy to find if you're looking for it. And of course, I have to mention our Know Your Options online childbirth course, which started just a couple years after the Birth Hour started, and it's really grown into an amazing community. You get lifetime access with that. So we have members returning for subsequent births and things like that. For the content of that course, I partnered with my friend Stephanie, who is a childbirth educator. She's also a birth and postpartum doula, a lactation consultant, and now a sleep consultant as well. So she has so much knowledge, and she really believes in evidence-based teaching, and that's been the whole goal of that course. So I'm grateful to everyone in that community. I know I'm not as active on social media with my personal life now that my babies are a little bit older, but if you want to get to know me more, I'm in those communities all the time. I'm on the Zoom calls every month, and I just love having that personal connection with the Birth Hour community. So thank you so much to everyone, whether you are a listener or a member of the community in another way. I'm so appreciative. And I never ask for reviews on iTunes and Spotify, but if you haven't done that yet, this would be a great time to do it, marking the 1,000th episode. Just to see a little boost in those reviews would be so great. All right, that's enough about that. Let's get to today's episode. Today's guest is Lauren, and she has 2 birth stories to share, both cesarean births. She dealt with postpartum preeclampsia after her first birth, and then her second cesarean was a really positive and healing experience, but also was the result of her blood pressure spiking towards the end of her pregnancy, so she talks about that experience as well. All right, let's hear from Lauren. Hi, Lauren. Welcome to The Birth Hour. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. I'm excited to get to both of your stories today. But before we do that, will you tell listeners a little bit about you and your family?
Sure. My name is Lauren. I have 2 kids. One is 3 years old and one is 3 months old. I live in New York City with my kids and my partner of 17 years. And I work as an environmental lawyer and community organizer, currently enjoying maternity leave.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's go ahead and start with your first pregnancy, getting pregnant, wherever you want to start.
Sure. Yeah. And I should say off the bat that this is probably a heavier birth story. I'm going to talk about IVF, preeclampsia, severe postpartum preeclampsia, and sort of a near miss incident. But I think all of this is important to share.
Yeah.
So I got pregnant via IVF in 2021 with my first child. We wound up doing IVF sort of for a slightly unusual reason. My partner's family has a history of Wilson's disease, which is a genetic inheritable disease. So before we got pregnant, we wanted to do genetic testing to double check that I wasn't also a carrier for that disease, because it's a condition that causes suffering. We didn't want to pass it on to our children if we could help it. And lo and behold, I was also a carrier for Wilson's disease on the test. That's, unlucky or lucky, depending on how you look at it, right? It was unlucky that I was a carrier, but good that we caught it before I was pregnant. Mm-hmm. So the genetic counselor at my OBGYN practice recommended that we do IVF, create embryos, and then test those embryos to make sure that we weren't passing on Wilson's. And for us, that was a total no-brainer. We were happy to do that. Of course, it would have been nice to get pregnant in the fun and free way, but it was what it was. And we were happy to protect our children and their children and on from inheriting this disease. So I started the IVF process. For anyone who's been through it, it's not fun. There's a lot of needles and a lot of appointments and, a lot of things that you have to do, but it went pretty smoothly, all things considered. And after about 8 months, we had our embryos, and we had embryos that were Wilson's free. And we went for a frozen embryo transfer where they put the embryo up in my uterus and hope that it sticks. And it stuck on the first transfer. So that was really fortunate. So at that point, this is summer 2021, I was pregnant. And I have, a high achieving, type A personality generally in life. I've succeeded academically and whatnot. So my mindset, I think, going into birth was sort of similar, that I would, just like any other test in life, I was going to study for my test. I was going to do the homework. I was going to do all of the things to get ready, and then I would knock it out of the park, right? And that was the mindset that I had right from the beginning of the pregnancy. I'm Black, and I was aware of the higher risks to Black women that come in birth. So I hired a doula, a Black doula, to help me through the pregnancy and through birth. And through the pregnancy, I did all of the things that you could think of in terms of preparing for a low intervention labor. I was planning to give birth in the hospital, but I still wanted it to be low intervention, and I really wanted to avoid a C-section. So I was, walking 3 miles a day. I was drinking red raspberry leaf tea. I was staying healthy. I was doing spinning babies. I went to the chiropractor. Any of the things that you can think of, I probably did those things.
Many people can relate to that.
Yes, I know they can. So, and I'm sure already where this is going.
Yeah.
So at 7 months pregnant, I got COVID during the Omicron wave, and it was pretty mild. It felt like, a cold. It didn't feel so bad. I wasn't terribly concerned about it. I was vaccinated and boosted at that point. So I just, got COVID, recovered, and carried on. I then went all the way to 41 weeks pregnant with no signs of labor. Just absolutely nothing was happening. And the doctor at that point said that she would recommend an induction. And I thought about it for a day and, looked up the evidence around inductions for 41 weeks. And I decided ultimately to do it because I was uncomfortable with the increasing risks of stillbirths and other complications after 41 weeks. So I went in for the induction with my partner, and it was really intense. I had a Foley balloon. I had lots and lots of Pitocin. They burst my bag of waters. Just like every intervention that I was hoping to avoid, I went through in that labor. And I wound up laboring for a long time, but never getting beyond 5 centimeters dilated. And I could feel my baby just headbutting my pelvis the whole time I was having contractions. It didn't feel like I was making any progress. And indeed, I was not making any progress. So 36 hours into this labor, the doctor recommended a C-section because I was starting to show signs of elevated blood pressure. The baby was starting to show some heartbeat decelerations. So we weren't tolerating it well anymore. We weren't making progress. That's what she thought was best. And I was just so heartbroken. I really didn't want this outcome. And it wasn't just because, I was afraid of surgery, which I certainly was. I'd never had surgery before, but I really wanted to give my kid the best possible start in life. And I think I had been really frightened by some of the things I read about C-sections and, the lasting effects they can have on babies, et cetera. So I remember being wheeled into the operating room, just sobbing. I was just so heartbroken. I felt like I had failed. My body had failed me. I'd failed my baby. My team had failed me, right? I didn't understand why this was happening. And on the operating table, I asked after they delivered what turned out to be my son, I didn't know the gender when I was pregnant, why they thought that I couldn't deliver him vaginally. And the doctor said, look, his head is in the 97th percentile. Like, I'm a fairly petite person. It just seemed like he really, truly could not fit. He wound up being 8 pounds, 11 ounces. So he was on the bigger side. I'm pretty petite. And it seems like it just was not going to be a fit for the two of us. So they deliver my son. He's perfect and wonderful and healthy and sweet and latches right away. But nonetheless, I'm heartbroken. I'm in so much physical pain, so much emotional pain. And the sort of days following delivery, recovering in the hospital, that's my dominant memory, unfortunately, is just beating myself up over how it went. As they're monitoring me in the hospital, they were taking my blood pressure, and I remembered that it kept setting off alarms, and the top number was like in the 130s. I honestly don't remember the bottom number, but it was elevated, but no one said anything to me about it. No one seemed concerned about it. I remember thinking like, well, I just had labor and I'm really upset, so no wonder it's on the higher side. But it did kind of stick in my mind because my blood pressure the whole pregnancy had been perfect, like in the teens, over 60s or 70s. So they sent me home about 3 days after the C-section, and around day 5 postpartum, I was home with the baby. We had just taken him to his 2-day post-discharge checkup, and I felt this feeling that I can only describe as a pulse. It was like this wave of pressure through my body, and it altered my vision for a second. And it was really strange. I'd never felt anything like that before. So I called my doctor and said, this weird thing just happened to me. I don't know what it was. And they were like, okay, well, you're probably just tired. Just monitor yourself and see if it happens again. And then a couple hours later, it happened again, that same sensation. And I was sitting down at the time, like I wasn't straining myself in any way. And something just felt weird. And my gut was telling me that something was wrong. So I texted my doula, and she was like, do you have a blood pressure cuff at home? And we didn't. So my spouse ran out to Rite Aid on the corner and managed to get the last blood pressure cuff on the shelf. Luckily, it was one of those that you need to squeeze the bulb at the end. It wasn't an electric one. So we had to watch a YouTube video to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
And he took my blood pressure and he took it a couple times and was like, I think you need to call the doctor again. It's still high. And at that point, it was in the 140s over 90s territory. So I called the doctor. I told her my blood pressure, and she was like, okay, I want you to go to the ER. You can't take your baby. And it's still a little hard to talk about because it was shocking and heartbreaking and such a scary moment because we didn't even have pumped milk. We didn't have formula. We had nothing because we just assumed that the baby was always going to be with me at that point. Luckily, before I had gone to the hospital for my induction, one of my neighbors who had a 3-month-old baby at the time was like, look, if you need anything, just let me know. Seriously, I even have a freezer full of breast milk. Just say the word and I'll help. And at the time I was like, that's very kind, but I can't see ever taking her up on that offer. And lo and behold, at 1 a.m, when I needed to go to the ER and we had nothing to feed the baby with, we called my neighbor, and she brought milk and kept him fed, which was just an incredible giving thing to do.
Yeah.
So I went to the hospital alone and, left my baby with my partner, and I was in the ER for about 5 hours before they brought me up to labor and delivery. And they're monitoring my blood pressure, and it's sort of steady, but it's not coming down. And then after they brought me up to labor and delivery, they're like, we're going to monitor it a couple more times to see where it's going. And it starts to go up and up and up. So they started me on a magnesium drip and diagnosed me with severe postpartum preeclampsia. And if anyone else has had the magnesium experience, I'm sure you'll relate to the feeling. It's like having a hangover pushed into your veins. You just feel horrible. And it made my tongue feel fuzzy. It was just a sort of a miserable experience. But I was really glad at the same time that I had trusted my gut and gotten myself to the hospital. And then after maybe like 18 hours into that, they told me that if I wanted to, I could have my partner bring the baby into the hospital. So he did. I was like in an antepartum room by myself at that point. So we felt, a little safer about the COVID risk of bringing him back to the hospital. And we had a wonderful reunion. I was able to, give him milk right there in the hospital and hold him again, which was great. So I was discharged after the magnesium treatment, but then like 8 hours later, following the instructions to monitor my blood pressure at home and having at that point secured an electronic blood pressure cuff, I had another dangerous blood pressure spike and I had to go back to the hospital, have another round of drugs via IV, and they monitored me for about 8 hours and then they sent me home. And as you can imagine, by that point, like all three of us, I think, were totally exhausted, emotionally, like traumatized, physically exhausted. It was really, really hard. And then you're taking care of a newborn. So it was a long road to recovery from that experience. And in retrospect, especially with the help of now having been through it twice, I can recognize that I was just profoundly depressed and scared. And I didn't feel safe in my body, right? I felt like betrayed by my body, by all that had happened. And I was also still physically like really beat up. I hadn't had a real chance to recover from the C-section because of all that running back and forth to the hospital. So we wound up hiring a postpartum doula, which was not something that I didn't even know that was a thing that you could hire. And she wound up being such a huge help. She came and helped me with the baby and let me rest and helped me take care of myself and helped me get on that road to recovery that I really needed. And helped me start reflecting about the experience that I'd had because there was a lot to digest there. Yeah. And I wound up doing some research on my own to try to figure out why I had wound up with severe postpartum preeclampsia after having, besides COVID, such a healthy pregnancy. And I found myself on the Preeclampsia Foundation website and was reading about all of the risk factors for preeclampsia. And I found myself taking off all these risk factors, right? I had an induction, that's a risk factor. I'd had a C-section, that's a risk factor. I was Black, that's a risk factor. And I had COVID, which they had already found at that point that having COVID in pregnancy doubles your risk for preeclampsia. So I started to get, I think, angry really about what had happened and why, even though I was setting off this blood pressure alarm, I wasn't at least told hey, your blood pressure is a little elevated. Do you have a cuff? If not, buy one on the way home and monitor yourself. Yeah. And when I went to my 6-week postpartum visit with my doctor, she was like, wow, I just can't believe that you wound up with preeclampsia. And I was like, well, I had, all these risk factors and I had COVID at 7 months. And she's like, well, everyone had COVID. And I felt so dismissed, right? Because lots of people had COVID. But just because that was the case doesn't mean that I shouldn't have been given a heads up that could have helped me take better care of myself. Because the reality is, had I not texted my doula, I don't know where my story would have ended if I just dismissed what I was feeling and didn't reach out for help. Yeah. And I feel like it should have been the responsibility of my medical team to make sure that I was well positioned. So even as I was pivoting towards externalizing that anger a little bit about what had happened to me, I wrote up what happened because the Preeclampsia Foundation was collecting stories at the time of women who'd had COVID and later had complications. So I sent in my story, and I didn't realize they were going to put it on the website, but they did. And that's no shade to the Preeclampsia Foundation. It was fine. I might have just missed that in my postpartum haze. And a reporter from the Washington Post was doing a story on complications from in childbirth during the pandemic. And she wound up reaching out to me and interviewing me. And I was featured in this story about complications during the pandemic and childbirth. And it got picked up in some other outlets. Funnily enough, my spouse is from Britain, and one of our friends in England saw my picture in the Daily Mail. We hadn't even realized that the Daily Mail picked up the story. So we told us oh, okay. So it was all just surreal, right? It was very much not how I envisioned starting off parenthood or recovering from birth, but I was happy to try to spread the word that, even as we were making a lot of advances in treating COVID and getting people safely through COVID, it was still a risk. And I just felt like people should be aware of that risk.
Yeah.
And adding insult to injury, my husband got COVID when the baby was under 2 months old and had to isolate from us for 10 days.
Oh, great. Just what you needed.
Just what I needed. And I truly, I don't even remember that time. Yeah. I don't know how I managed, but I took care of him on my own for 10 days with no help because we'd been exposed and we didn't want to expose anyone else.
Yeah.
So it was a wild time. And, nonetheless, time marches on, and towards the sort of second half of my maternity leave, I was feeling better. By the time I went back to work after 6 months, I was feeling pretty good. And at that point, I went for a regular annual checkup. And it was my first time back in a doctor's office since my postpartum visit. So it had been 5 months or so. And in the waiting room, my heart started pounding. I started sweating. I'm breathing hard. I'm what's wrong with me? I didn't know what was happening. And they took my blood pressure and it was sky high. And I was able to realize that I was having a panic attack. I'd never had one before, but it was this first sign that maybe I wasn't okay yet with everything that had happened.
Yeah.
And maybe I had some more work to do on the emotional recovery front. So I started seeing a therapist. I did EMDR therapy, and all of that was really, really helpful. And my only wish is that I had started doing that sooner. In retrospect, and it still sounds so naive maybe to talk about it like this, but I thought that having postpartum depression or anxiety was something that happened to folks quote unquote for no reason. And I had this really traumatic birth that I was able to recognize as traumatic, and was okay, well, you're sad and anxious because you had this difficult birth. So that doesn't air quotes count as postpartum depression. For whatever reason, I didn't think it was something, because I could recognize the cause. It didn't occur to me to seek help before I started having the panic attacks. So definite, message for anyone who finds themselves sad or anxious, no matter what the reason is or perceived reason is after birth, right? There's no reason you shouldn't go seek help.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I started working on it. Fast forward a couple of years, I had put in the work. I felt like I was in a much stronger place, and my then toddler is thriving and happy. And we had always wanted to have 2 children. For a long time after I had my son, I was I cannot imagine going through this again. I know I want 2 kids, but that was really hard. But after 2 or so years postpartum, I felt ready, thanks to the work I had done to recover from the first time. And I decided that going into a second pregnancy, I wanted to have a fresh start on all fronts, different hospital, different doctor, so that I wouldn't be inadvertently triggered by anything during the birth process or pregnancy. And that was a great choice. Having a fresh start was certainly what I needed. And I found a doctor who advertised as being very pro VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean, because I was hoping for a VBAC this time around. At that point, it was the C-section was the devil I knew, but if I could avoid having major surgery again, especially while recovering with a toddler in tow this time, I wanted to do that. And I hired the same doula again. She'd really earned my trust, especially after what happened the first time, and went about preparing to try to have a VBAC. But this time, my mindset was really different. Instead of saying, all right, I'm going to drink the tea and do the walks and eat the dates and all these things, because I know that I can control the outcome of my birth, I did it all because I wanted to know, even if I wound up with another C-section, that I had tried, that I'd done everything I could, and I could rest knowing that I had tried all the things and wound up needing that intervention anyway. I wanted to have that peace. So I proceed through the second pregnancy. I had another frozen embryo transfer. It stuck again, which was really great. Pregnancy was rougher this time for sure. Being pregnant with a toddler in tow is harder. And I was really, really nauseous this time. I wound up needing to get prescription anti-nausea medication and stay on that for more than half the pregnancy. I was super tired, right? All that stuff. But I was consoled knowing this was going to be the final time I was going to be pregnant and soldiered on. And when we started getting, closer to the second half or the last third of the pregnancy, talking with my doctor about a birth plan, she said that she was pro-spontaneous VBAC, but would not induce me for a VBAC. She thought that the risks of that were too high. I know that some doctors do induce for VBACs, but given my history of severe postpartum preeclampsia, I think she thought it was going to be too much strain on my body, and I was cool with that. I was not interested in having another induction. It just felt like I could go through that and wind up with another C-section anyway, and I would rather just go straight to a C-section. But I was still hoping to go into labor spontaneously. So I'm doing all the things in that last month, all the exercises, et cetera, and I started getting some really fun signs that labor was maybe approaching. I was getting really crampy. I lost my mucus plug at 38 weeks. I even had one morning where I busted out the contraction timer because it felt like things were getting regular, but it just never kicked into gear. And this was again after doing dates and tea and the chiropractor and acupuncture and sex and evening primrose oil, all of it, and nothing got labor going. So I had the peace of mind entering week 40, knowing that I'd tried and feeling like maybe I'm just one of those people who needs the C-section. I need the belly birth to deliver. So we had scheduled a C-section for 41 weeks and 1 day. And that was a Friday of that week. And as the week takes on, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have a C-section on Friday, and had a little cry about it, but was feeling prepared and at peace with that outcome. And then the night before the scheduled C-section, I had been monitoring my blood pressure consistently through the pregnancy, given what had happened last time, and then daily as we went into the final couple weeks. And all of a sudden, my blood pressure was up to 159/110. So it just shot up in that final day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And, the day before it was in the 120s over 80s. So given my history, I didn't waste any time and I went straight to the hospital. My spouse stayed with our toddler, and then we called my dad to come stay with him so that my spouse was able to follow because it was in the evening. My kid was already asleep. And at the hospital, before my spouse got there, I was like, so what do we think we're going to do? I have the C-section scheduled for 11 o'clock in the morning. And they were like, well, when was the last time you ate? And I said, and they were like, okay, well, when it's 8 hours from then, we're just going to do the C-section. There's no reason to wait at this point. So they started prepping me. They had me hooked up to a monitor to make sure the blood pressure didn't spike further, or to be alerted, I guess, in case that happened. And it stayed high. It didn't get higher than that, but they were monitoring it quite closely. My spouse showed up a few hours after I got there, and then right around 7 a.m. or so, they gave me a C-section. So I wound up meeting my baby a little earlier than I had planned to. And it was such a different experience. I will never forget walking into the operating room. They had me walk from the prep room into the OR and climbing up the little step stool and sitting on the bed, under my own power with a smile on my face, as compared to being rolled in during my first labor crying.
Yeah.
I felt totally different. I was so excited. Mm-hmm. I was just interested in what was happening. I was like, I'm going to be alert and awake during the surgery, and they're going to pull my baby out of me. This is kind of cool. And just my attitude had completely changed.
Yeah.
And they did it, and they do the C-section. And as a bonus this time as well, I had wanted to get my fallopian tubes removed. I have a history of ovarian cancer in my family, and they've found that most ovarian cancers actually start in the fallopian tube, not the ovary. So I'd talked with my doctor about having that done if I had a C-section at the same time, or if I wound up with a vaginal birth going back to her and having it done at my 6-week postpartum visit. So I was able to sort of kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. They do the C-section. They take out my fallopian tube, so permanent birth control for the win. And the baby was great. She was 9 pounds, 2 ounces. She cried right away. She latched right away. Recovery was so much smoother this time around for so many reasons. But from jump, I could feel such a difference having not been in labor before the C-section versus just like going to the C-section after, being relatively well rested. It was just a much, much easier experience. And breastfeeding went really well, continues to go really well. I've been very fortunate on that front. It also went really well with my son. So it's nice to be having that smooth experience once more. It's been such a wonderful change and a wonderful full circle experience to go through this second pregnancy and second delivery. Yeah. And I feel like my mental health has been really steady. I did wind up getting diagnosed with postpartum anxiety again, but I started a very low dose of an antidepressant, and that is working. And I was much quicker this time to be like, I don't totally feel like myself, and to talk with my doctor about that, right? I wasn't shy about asking for help, which is also great. So yeah, I think I've learned a lot of lessons through this process. It was quite the learning experience. I'm happy that I won't have to apply these lessons again because we're done having kids. But I just really want to emphasize for people who are in a similar boat to me, where they wanted that VBAC, they didn't get that VBAC, or they didn't want a C-section and they wound up with one anyway. Your body didn't fail you. Your body didn't fail you no matter what that circumstance is. My body grew healthy, beautiful children who are happy and thriving. And it got me on the road to recovery. And that's a victory. That's not a defeat. And I worry that, some of the content and some of the things that I absorbed that first pregnancy, where people, super well-meaning folks, will say things like, your body's never going to grow a baby that's too big for you, or anyone can have a vaginal birth. And even coming home with my daughter, I live in a big apartment building with an elevator, and riding the elevator, an older guy, recognized that I had a newborn and congratulated me and said, how did you have her, the normal way or via C-section? And I said, I had a C-section. He was like, and he sort of chuts and says, we do too many of those.
Wow.
It's like, okay, well, it wasn't my first choice either, but I didn't say that. I don't know what I said in the moment, but
it's so wild what people are willing to say around pregnancy and babies.
It really is. The only appropriate thing to say is congratulations, right? In that moment.
Yeah.
And look, like even the WHO estimates, the World Health Organization, this international medical body, estimates that like 10 to 15% of pregnancies need to end in a C-section. That's necessary.
Yeah.
And I don't think for me it was ever going to be a choice between a vaginal birth and a C-section. It was a choice, little did I know, between having a C-section and coming home at all, maybe. Mm-hmm. So I'm so grateful to live in 2025 and for these interventions, right? For so long after my first birth, I couldn't even touch my scar. I couldn't look at it. I felt such a sense of shame about it. And now I wear it with a sense of pride, honestly. It's this reminder of my kids and what I went through, and the miracle that is modern medicine and the miracle that is birth. And the preeclampsia, right, coming on at the last minute. I know that there are probably folks who would be like, well, if you just waited one more week, if you went to 42 weeks, maybe you would have gotten that VBAC, or I would have had that first vaginal birth. But to me, I wasn't willing to take that gamble. And I was okay following the guidance of groups like PUSH that highlight those increased risks after 41 weeks. The preeclampsia was a sign that my body was done, I think, either way, but right. I'm happy that I did not wait. So I just wanted to put that out there. The other parents who were in this, I wanted a vaginal birth or a VBAC, but here I am having a repeat C-section. I see you. We still did it. We are not less than. We still grew human beings, whole human beings, and birthed them. And that is my story. And I hope that it helps someone else out there who's traveling a similar road.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to you for sharing it and for making all of those great points at the end. And, I hear it a lot that repeat cesarean, when it's planned or calm. It's just a completely different experience. And like you said, we're grateful for modern medicine when we need it. A lot of birth can be completely untouched and be fine. And then sometimes we need these interventions. So I don't think they need to be like the afterthought or the last resort. In fact, with our Know Your Options childbirth course, our course instructor made that the first module was planned cesarean, because she's like, I'm sick of this being like this thing we just like tag on the end, like, oh, all this other stuff didn't work out. So here's a little bit of info about this, if they even cover it at all,
Yeah.
But people need to be prepared for all the different ways things can go.
Yeah, absolutely. And to not beat themselves up over however it turns out, because, it's trite, but at the end of the day, if you have your kids and you're able to recover, that's all that matters. And for so long I was stuck, especially with the rehospitalization and having to leave my son.
Yeah.
I really mourned those 18 or so hours that I lost with him, but I know folks go through much longer separations than that with NICU stays and whatnot. And now I look at him and I look at all of our time, and I have all the time in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I missed some of those few first golden days, but he needs his mom more than he needed that time. And I'm glad that, it's a bummer that I had to be separated from him, but at the end of the day, I have a whole lifetime of time to bond with him and be with him and my daughter now. And if you find yourself in that position where you have to separate from your newborn, of course, that's horrible and it can be really traumatic, but it isn't as if you miss, this little window of time and they're never going to bond with you, right? Like they're not ducklings. You will still have that time on the other side of whatever you're going through.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you found the help to like process all of that, because I'm sure most of that came from just that feeling of maybe this could have been avoided if people had been more informative at the outset at the hospital. And like you said, they just kind of sent you home without any information, which is not okay.
No, it's wild. I don't understand why every single birthing person isn't given a blood pressure cuff at their first appointment, right?
Yeah.
It's like such a no-brainer intervention. And it's not, especially because my blood pressure was great the whole pregnancy. It's just not something that was really on my radar. And that feels like such a clear missed opportunity. I'm so fortunate that I had a doula who was informed and gave me that instruction, because I just don't know what would have happened if we weren't able to get that last blood pressure cuff on the shelf in that moment.
Yeah, doulas for the win, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you mentioned a lot of great resources throughout, but anything you want to kind of highlight here at the end?
Yeah, I have a couple things I want to run through as resources. First, I want to give a shout out to my doulas.
Yes.
I'm going to give their names and their websites where they can be found. And like I said, I'm in New York City, so all of these are New York City-based folks. My birth doula was Nubia Jones. She operates at doulavivabirths.com. She's incredible. I'm so lucky that she was part of my stories. My postpartum doula after my son is Natasha Dillahunt, and her website is natashadillahunt.com. She was an amazing resource during a really difficult time in my life, so I'm very, very grateful to her. And my postpartum doula after my daughter, we had moved to a different part of the city, so we found someone else for up here, is Sophia Medina, and her website is auspiciousbeginningsdoula.com. Also amazing, just a wonderful, calm source of support after having my daughter. And then I wanted to list out some other sort of grab bag resources. The Preeclampsia Foundation, I mentioned, for anyone who wants to learn more about preeclampsia or has been diagnosed with it, wonderful resource. Also want to shout out La Leche League. I've had a really smooth breastfeeding journey overall, but I did have some issues at the beginning with oversupply, and I got mastitis once and just had questions. And whenever I had a question, I could go on their website and get really good advice. So I'm grateful to that. In New York City, there is also now a free and low-cost doula program that people are eligible for if they live in certain parts of the city, including where I live. So if you happen to be in New York City and you'd like a doula, it's something I'd encourage you to check out. And you can Google it, or I think the link might go in the show notes, and it's worth considering. And then for me, a big part of parenting and being a parent is fighting to make the world a better place, not just for my kids, but for all kids. So wanted to shout out just a couple things that I'm involved with on that front. First is the campaign for New York Health, which would ensure that everyone in New York is able to access better healthcare, including reproductive and OBGYN and healthcare related to birth. The second is Climate Families NYC, which organizes families to fight for a livable planet. They do kid-friendly and family-friendly climate activism. And the last is Kids Over Cars, which is a group I co-founded. Unfortunately, there have been more than 125 children killed in traffic violence since 2014 in New York City. We think that that is unacceptable. It's twice as many kids killed in New York State by motor vehicle traffic than by firearms, to put that number in perspective.
Oh my gosh.
So we're working to make our streets safe, healthy, and joyful for all New York City kids. And I think links to those things, they're very Googleable if the links get lost. So that's what I'd share.
Yeah, we'll put those on the show notes. And then where can people reach out to connect with you?
So folks are welcome to leave a comment on this episode. I'm not really on social media outside of my activisty projects, but I'm more than happy to talk to folks one-on-one and get connected that way.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much again for sharing.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Now I'm going to chat with Abigail about all the amazing things they have going on with Zenith Health. Hi, Abigail. Thanks so much for coming on the Birth Hour to talk with me about Zenith Health.
Thanks so much, Bryn. So excited to be here.
Before we get into that discussion, will you tell listeners just a little bit about you and your role with Zenith?
Yes. So I'm Abigail Bertelson. I'm the founder and CEO of Zenith. We're a newer company we just launched earlier in the spring of 2025 and super excited to share a little bit more.
Awesome. And let's talk about just why you started Zenith and what it is.
Yes, definitely. We actually started Zenith just on the basic premise that it's so wild in 2025 that we still don't have good answers about some of the most basic questions in pregnancy, things that I'm sure all of the listeners to the pod have gone through at some point. You know, is melatonin okay? What about Robitussin for my cough? You know, is it normal to gain this much weight by week 20? A really topical one that keeps coming up in the last few weeks with all of the discourse around SSRIs and antidepressants, right? Can I keep taking my SSRI while I'm trying to conceive and while I'm pregnant? And there's so much research and data missing, but we just looked at this and thought it doesn't have to actually be this way. You know, there's millions of pregnancies in the US every single year, all of which contain thousands of these little experiences around medicines and symptoms, supplements, quality of life, you know, all of these different aspects of pregnancy, but as an industry, we're not capturing or learning from this really effectively. A fun fact that is not that fun that I like to share is many people are surprised to learn that women weren't even required to be in clinical trials until 1993.
Yeah.
And pregnant women today are still excluded from trials pretty much altogether, which just means we have a ton of ground to make up on the research side in women's health generally, but particularly within pregnancy. And so what we've done is we've created 2 tools that moms can actually use in their pregnancy journeys for a little bit more peace of mind and to help empower other moms in the future with better data. So the first one is actually what we're calling the Pregnancy Evidence Project. It's a fully opt-in research study. It's fully observational, which means the cool thing is that you can actually contribute to research without changing anything about what you're doing or trying any experimental treatments, which is the beauty of learning from real-world experiences. And the second is what we're calling Penny, which is our personal pregnancy evidence navigator, hence the nickname for Penny. And you can ask Penny essentially any of your pregnancy questions wherever and whenever they come up to see the latest data and evidence. So Penny can help you cut through all of the noise of navigating across social media and Google searches and your friend's sister who just had a baby and did that thing and the baby was fine. So really trying to bring a bit more of the latest and greatest research papers and clinical guidelines and physician authored content to be more accessible and readily available to moms.
Very cool. So how have you seen people using Penny so far during pregnancy?
Yeah, we've seen lots of women turning to Penny for the late night panic Google type of questions. You know, I'm trying to fall asleep. Can I take this melatonin? Things like my symptoms went away. Should I be super worried about that? You know, am I having postpartum anxiety or is this the normal baby blues? And a lot of moms have shared with us that it's super helpful to get these responses kind of in real time, assuage the immediate fear, and then actually share the link and share the response that they're finding with their trusted team, whether that's their partner or their spouse, a doula that they might be working with, a midwife or an OB, to actually inform a more detailed discussion about their concerns or questions, because it's often kind of a two-sided thing where you want that immediate reassurance, but that doesn't fully, answer your question, or you might want to continue talking to your provider about it. And so in that vein, we've actually also been working with a lot of doulas and other birth workers who have themselves found Penny to be a really helpful tool in pulling, lots of evidence and kind of research papers in response to questions from their clients, or helping share Penny with their clients when they first get started as that kind of additional line of defense for, the random times at which these questions often come up.
Right. So it's kind of like asking like Chat GPT, but it's only pulling from evidence-based research, right?
Exactly. So it's only pulling from kind of our library of studies that we think are good, clinical guidelines, things that the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists is recommending. So we want it to be really that trusted source to get stuff that is high quality.
Yeah. And you mentioned postpartum. So is this something that supports people from like all aspects of trying to conceive, pregnancy, postpartum, or what's kind of the guideline there?
Yes, Penny is best for women who are currently pregnant, but we can also pull evidence around postpartum experiences. So we actually see a lot of folks use this for questions around breastfeeding and lactation exposures, as well as postpartum mental health questions and things like that. And we also support evidence focused on fertility and trying to conceive. So a lot of moms have questions about what to do in preparing for this pregnancy journey, which Penny supports as well. And the Pregnancy Evidence Project, which is the research side of things, also supports postpartum. So you can join even if you've already had your baby and share a little bit more about your experience after the fact.
Very cool. So speaking of the Pregnancy Evidence Project, how does that work? Can you just share a little bit more about, some of the things you guys are trying to bridge as far as gaps in pregnancy research?
Definitely. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have a long way to go in women's health research and in pregnancy research. And a lot of this is because women have been excluded from clinical trials for so long, and particularly in pregnancy. And so our goal is really to learn from all of the things that are already happening today. We think it's this total misnomer that people say there's no data, we can't answer these questions, because we all probably know 10 moms who have made 10 different decisions on any given intervention or question, or had 10 versions of the same symptom. And so really how this project works is women can decide whether or not they want to opt in. It's fully optional. All of the data is completely private, firewalled, and segregated from the question asking side. So there's no, risk of your data being exposed to advertisers or used for marketing. It is purely governed by an institutional review board research project. And women can basically share brief surveys on a weekly and trimester level basis, just talking about their symptoms that week, their quality of life, any major exposures they had. So things like women with chronic conditions who might be continuing medications that they're using, acute issues or, illnesses that come up during pregnancy, asking women if they took, for example, Zofran for nausea or, Unisom or B6 or some of these really commonly used remedies. And women can also consent to share their medical record data so that ultimately we have this very robust data set that looks at experiences and health outcomes for mom and baby at birth so that we can all answer the question that's on everyone's mind, which is really, does doing X affect how baby is going to feel and how baby is growing and how mom is going to feel. And so we're really excited because we think that by taking this approach, we can get to much more scale than, any of the research projects that have really happened in pregnancy before, so that we can finally have high enough sample sizes to power really, really interesting analyses around how other moms are going through pregnancy and being able to share that information back with both moms, but also researchers and the teams that are trying to publish, hopefully, better research on this for the future.
Yeah, this is so exciting. It feels very grassroots, and I love that anyone can get involved. And where can people go to do that?
Yeah, definitely. People can check out our website at www.zenithhealth.io. That's a great landing page to check out either Penny if you have a question that you want to ask, or start getting involved with the Pregnancy Evidence Project. The Pregnancy Evidence Project does have a fairly lightweight, what's called informed consent process. So we want to make sure that as people are joining, they're fully aware of what they're signing up to, how their data is going to be used and protected, how it will be used kind of down the line. And once you do that, you can start submitting surveys and sharing your experience.
Awesome. And with the Penny aspect, there's no cost involved with that, right?
No cost. One of our core values of the company is that we really want to make all of this information more accessible and transparent to moms. It's really frustrating to see sometimes the cost associated with getting access to better knowledge and, finding a research paper, but it's behind a $75 paywall. So it's really important to us to democratize this access for folks who are looking for really good information.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I'm so glad I got to hear more about this and share with my listeners, and I'm excited to see where everything goes with Penny and with the project.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bryn.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much again to Lauren for sharing her birth stories with us, and to Zenith Health for sponsoring this episode. You can find the show notes page by going to thebirthhour.com and searching for Lauren's name in the search bar, and we'll have all of the important links mentioned on that page, as well as in the podcast app where you're listening to this episode. And thanks again for your support. I can't believe it's 1,000 episodes. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, head to thebirthhour.com and click Become a Member to pledge your support. And as a thank you, you'll get an invitation to join our private Facebook group and access to exclusive episodes. Your vote of confidence and support means the world to me.